Good evening, everybody. Can you all hear me? This is a packed house. This looks awesome. Thank you all for taking the time out of your schedule to come out tonight for our second installment of this season's Bergen County Revolutionary War Roundtable. Those of you that have been here in January, you know that we're focusing on things around the greater Bergen County area all year. Big shout out to Bob Carpenter. He's the muscle behind all of this. Thank you for everything you do. We appreciate it. Tonight we're really lucky. We have a great speaker who has been talking to me about this subject for a very long time. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about him, and then he will tell you a little bit about why he's here tonight. Kevin Tremble owns and operates a small business in Bergen County and has been deeply involved in the local history community for a very long time. In addition to his work as a transportation planner with the Tri-State Regional Planning Commission, as a transportation planner and engineer with the National Park Service, I think he had a little bit something to do with the Statue of Liberty. He wasn't there when they erected it the first time, but later on. And as assistant manager for design on the Hudson ferry project for the New York, New Jersey Port Authority. As if he didn't sound busy enough, Mr. Tremble has also previously served in leadership roles on the Palisades Interstate Parks Commission, Citizens Advisory Council, with the Washington Association of New Jersey, with the Crossroads of the American Revolution NHA Association, and the Bergen County Historic Sites Advisory Board. Currently, he serves as a member of the Palisades Interstate Park Commission. Commissioner Marianne Moroso, she is our liaison for Bergen 250, and she's going to say a few words for us as well.
I am one of those people for whom Bergen County 250 years ago is as rich and real as Bergen County today, and I know all of you are the same way. We are delighted to share the trends, the conflicts, the undertones of Bergen County 250 years ago in our Bergen 250 effort. And we're delighted to see a packed house. Hit all of our roundtables. They'll all be wonderful. Thank you.
And after Kevin's talk tonight, we're going to have roundtable member John Hardy talk a little bit about Fort Ticonderoga. Very excited for him to come and talk about this. So without further ado, Mr. Tremble.
Thank you, Colin, and thank you all for coming this evening. And I hope at the end of this talk, you'll be able to understand a little bit more about what was going on after July and the reading of the Declaration down in Manhattan at Bowling Green Park. Things really began to steam on the river. That was way before, actually, steam. Before I go any further, are there any members of the public who are former Royal Navy veterans? No? No one here? Good, I can be free about what I say about the Royal Navy. Now, they were a formidable opponent. However, George Washington recognized early on that the cliffs of the Palisades and Fort Washington in Manhattan were valuable to defend the Hudson right from the start. And I think one of the things that you will see as I go through this topic is that, you know, there were many of different kinds of things that were used, from obstacles in the river to what we call rogue galleys or gunboats on the river. We're even going to talk a little bit about a secret weapon. So I think, you know, it's important for us to understand how the defenses were formed. And the main focus of my talk tonight will be Fort Lee and Fort Washington. However, some of the events that happened will be revealed in the rest of the Hudson as far as up by New Windsor. I have some points about other defenses further upriver and further on from 1776. So we're going to look first at 1776, and what kind of things we see happening. All right, this is an event that occurred October 9th of 1776. It's done from an artist who painted this in 1781, and he was the artist to the king, the marine artist to the king. His name was Dominic Serres. And in this imagery, you see the guns at Fort Lee on the left and the guns at Fort Washington on the right, and the no guns firing on the British squadron in the river. Now, later on, I'm going to show you some close-ups of this. But this is an important imagery that was done contemporaneously to an action, one of 6 actions on the river. Here's the overview of what we're looking at in terms of the Fort Lee, Fort Washington battlefield. And the battlefield actually, the chevaux de frise, which you'll hear about, was a blockade, but I believe it's a little bit further south than the George Washington Bridge, because I'll explain that as we go further. But the crossing of the river at this point is very shallow river up to mid-river. It's in the 20 to 30 feet range. After that, as it gets closer to the New York side, it gets deeper. It's about 50 feet in the channel. Now, these British ships are, they're about 15 or 20 feet in draft. That's how deep they go in the water. So, the shallow side was easy to create obstacles. We'll see that as we go forward. The battlefield itself, as I mentioned, is 25 miles. And the major activity was July to November. And we see that Washington was the lead in the creation of the idea that we need to defend the Hudson because the Brits want to control the Hudson with their fabulous military fleet, and they think at that point that they can divide the colonies, as I believe we all learned. Anybody not learn that? No, we all learned that. Okay, good. So now, here's the cast of characters, and all of them are military except one. I couldn't find an image of another guy who's very important because there isn't one. Thank you, Billy Newman, for telling me that. I had a question and you confirmed it. George ordered it. Benjamin Franklin was involved. You'll find out as we go through that how he was involved. The next man on the right is General Nathaniel Greene, and then we have at the bottom Rufus Putnam, Henry Knox, and the last guy, I think, Mercer, yeah. I didn't realize that Mercer was involved. He was, as you know, later killed at Princeton, but he was involved in bringing troops to help build Fort Lee. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about is the river itself. So I have this nautical chart, and I wanted to talk for a second about the current. Any sailors sail on the Hudson? No? Nobody sailed the Hudson or paddled or? Oh, a couple, okay. So what you know, if you've been on the Hudson, is that the current's very swift, 5 knots on a flood. On a flood. And so you need a really strong wind to go upriver most of the time, so you go with the tide. The other thing that's important to understand is that you are restricted in places, the channel, and the Palisades presents a bit of a wind shield, as it would be, from winds from the west and southwest, which are prevailing winds in the summer, and then it becomes a challenge to tack back and forth in the colder months when it becomes northeast mostly as a prevailing wind situation. So that's the wind. You've heard the tide. That's what the challenge is, both defenders and aggressors. Okay, this one is a quick summary of one guy in a British ship, the Pearl, and he was trying to get supplies in a squadron up to Dobbs Ferry, and that's about 15 miles. So he ran the gauntlet of the guns that were at Fort Washington and Fort Lee, got himself through the obstacle, and it only took him 29 hours to do the 15 miles. He had to get his ship's boats out front, and what you do in a sailing ship when it can't get it moving is you row it with the crew and you pull it to get forward. It's a very cumbersome and slow process. So that was the conditions that they were dealing with on the river. Now, I'm going to talk for a moment just about the rest of the Hudson River defenses. Now, these defenses you're going to see are later, and they've evolved from what we're going to talk about at Fort Lee and Fort Washington. Bear Mountain is where the red arrow goes. Anthony's Nose is where the bridge, the Bear Mountain Bridge, crosses. And there was, on the left-hand side, a chain and boom constructed there in '77. Now, one of the things I also want to mention is many of you know of the work of Claire Thal, and I wanted to give Claire recognition. This is a map that she made. It's called Historic Hudson River Highlands, and I sort of took two pieces of it because it's so specific and detailed and fine, and she was a wonderful keeper of our history. So this kind of boom, the science is amazing. This was a boom, and if you look closely here, it's got a pulley system for tightening and adjusting it. And it also had to be hauled out in the wintertime was the plan. But it was never used because the Brits attacked Fort Montgomery, which is one of our Palisades managed sites just north of Bear Mountain. And there's a great program up there about how they defended the work of the Hudson by the Brits. This is a little bit later and further upriver, and you'll see an example of a different kind. This is not the type of chevaux de frise blockade obstacle that was used at Fort Lee. It was used up in the New Windsor area and across to what's called Bannerman's Island. And that was in '77 also. Now the one in the middle is the West Point Great Chain. We all know about the Great Chain, right? Yeah, nod, yes, please. Okay, good, thank you. And the Great Chain was never passed. It was effective, and it wasn't put in until '78. So this idea of trying to protect the Hudson River intact from British control lasted through a good part of the war. Henry Knox wrote to George Washington. Now, the reason for talking about Henry is partly over there at Fort Ticonderoga, where he brought many cannon to Boston to chase the Brits out. And so the story is important, the Fort Ticonderoga story, is because he did the movement of 60 guns, many of them large. And what I did was, for John, I put a list, an inventory of all the guns that he brought with him from Fort Ticonderoga to Boston. Washington then ordered the guns shipped south to New York, and he brought another 60 with him. So he was busy moving things around. But he's an interesting character because he tells you what he's telling Washington what he needs to do in this slide. he has to assemble more troops to operate these guns that he's bringing down from Boston. And the last sentence here, you know, he's been drafting people from various regiments. They have no training. They're very unskilled people, and you'll see what happens as a result of that as I go through. But thank you, Henry, for getting us the guns we needed. Okay, so this is the obstacle that the British were facing when they reached this area, Fort Lee and Fort Washington. It wasn't Fort Lee at the time. It was called Mount Constitution. Sometimes it was called the Mount. It has different names throughout. But it's over 330 feet at this location. The New York side is around 260 feet. The park that's there now was based on a report that the commission, the Palisades Interstate Park Commission had prepared about why it was significant. And it was significant, the title of this report is that the defense of the Hudson. And so that was the driving force at the time to create a park at this location. 1963, the report. 1964, the governor came up and said, we're going to build a park with these new Green Acre funds that we voted for. So that's the genesis of Fort Lee Historic Park. I took this shot a few years ago, but it was a snowy day. And if you look on the left side, just under the outreaching branch, that's the visitor center location. And that's sort of at the north end of the park. But I wanted to point out that just a current issue, that road that runs in between the river and the top, I want to thank Senator Johnson. The storms that we have seen, I'm going to tell you from a commissioner's point of view about what we're doing here quickly. From the storms of Ida and Sandy and Isaias and all those storms that we had, the park received, according to FEMA, $50 million worth of damage. FEMA works through reimbursement. The park doesn't have the money. So what do? We asked our state representative, Senator Gordon Johnson, to see if he could figure out how to get the state to release the money so we could do the repairs. That road is almost unusable. And the one coming down from Englewood is totally unusable. So that's what we're going to be doing in the next 6 to 8 months from now. So we're going to fix it. So you will have access again. Now, I put this up to share with you a little bit about what was going on in the early part of the 20th century and the late 19th century. These are, the red dots are more visible than the other, but most of the battlements, the things that look like facing the river, those are the things where the guns were placed, the gun emplacements. The red is artifacts that were found all over around that location in the blue square, which was where the fort of Fort Lee was. So it wasn't in the park, it was on shore. And I'll show you, this is Main Street, Fort Lee here. So it's just a little bit to the south and a little bit between where the park is, where the monument to the rebel soldiers is put. So I have placed copies of this with the detail of all the numbers that are in those red dots on the rear table, so you can pick one up if you like. Okay. I wanted to just share with you what was operating at Fort Lee. And quickly, it's just the list of what we lost. And the red shows you the heaviest guns. So this is a 32 pound, the next one's 24 pound, the next one's 18, 12, 6, and 3. Now, these were the numbers of those guns. There were 5 32 pounders, captured guns, 3 24s, 5 24s. And the interesting part of this row, they were found on the road to Hackensack. So they didn't make it with Washington further south, but they got dumped because they couldn't go further with them. So it's an interesting picture of there were 26 guns total in this. There were also 34 guns that were captured at Fort Washington. I'm going to talk a little bit about Fort Washington. There's a small piece of Fort Washington in a place called Bennett Park on the right. You see the bridge, and it's at 183rd Street, but it's only a small piece. And there, if you go there, you'll see this on 183rd Street. They call it a stele, and it tells the story of Fort Washington. However, there's a Bergen County connection here. And the Bergen County connection is the guy who designed this was Lamb Studios, which was in Tenafly ultimately, but not at the time this was done. Yeah. So it's interesting that they were almost as famous as Tiffany. Yeah, thank you. In terms of their work. Now, here's what Fort Washington really was. It ran from roughly where the George Washington Bridge is, maybe a little bit south of there, and it ran all the way to Spuyten-Duyvil. And these were the 3 basic pieces. In Fort Tryon, and the cloisters in Fort Tryon, you might recognize those. But also, there's a special importance about Fort Washington, and not more than it was named for George Washington, but that Margaret Corbin, who was a wife of a gunner on a large gun at Fort Washington, when her husband was killed, she took over the gun and proceeded to get wounded seriously herself. And she was awarded a pension, I believe it was, by the Congress for her military service. She was the first woman to have that happen. And sometimes is referred to as Molly Pitcher, anybody? Okay, so Molly Pitcher there's also another Molly Pitcher at Monmouth Battlefield. So we have a Jersey Molly Pitcher, and then we have a New York Molly. So we're trying to play it right by both states. You can't see this stuff, but the point of this is look at the top row is all New York City area events in '76, July through December. And there were certain very large events going on, particularly in September and October. And so what I did was I pulled out the first one, which talks about July 12th. Now, July 12th is only a few days after the announcement of the Declaration. And Washington was already setting things in motion on the 14th. And Henry's note, Henry Knox's note, was like the 9th. And I think it was like the day after they read the Declaration. And Henry's already thinking, my God, what am I going to do? George wants us to do all this building at the Fort Lee and Fort Washington. Now we dig into what was going on being built. And this is a detail of what that larger scene was on October 9th, excuse me. So in it, you'll see at the very top a red and white striped flag. That was the colors that were displayed at Fort Lee that the artist saw. And down here we have Burdett's Ferry. And then if you look carefully, you'll see a line of sort of foam or splashing. That's the chevaux de frise that you'll see, you'll learn in a few minutes what it consisted of. Then in the very background, this is, this is one of the tenders from the three vessels squadron that was moving through here. Okay, in the background here, you can see, and I'll put this up later if you like to come and look at it, are the I think about 6 of the row galleys. And you can see they have a special sail. It's called, I believe, a lateen sail. Its arm is on a slant. And they usually carried a large gun in the bow, a 32-pound gun often in the bow of these very small row galleys. So you're learning about now what we've seen about how the obstacles are in place and the row galleys are there and the cannons are at the 2 forts. So this is really the essence of the defense at this location. Now, this is a mid-19th century sketch of what the chevaux de frise, where it might have been. I don't think it was there, and I'll try to explain it to you later, but right now, I believe it's further south. And there's a point, if you see the W, that's the Fort Washington main fort. And B, item B is actually something called not Bloomingdale, but I think it is Bloomingdale actually. And that's where you're going to find out maybe where the secret weapon was used. Let's take a look at the chevaux de frise. This is the obstacle that was designed by Robert Erskine. And Robert Erskine is a very interesting character because he was a scientist. And he was an iron master up at Ringwood. And you can go see at Ringwood Manor some of his story. But this was a fascinating piece because the science behind it is that it's heavy, but it floats. And he was very careful to describe this. And he said if you're placing it in the specs, he said you really might need to place like a seat in that triangle and load it with rock to hold it down. There's also a possibility that these were chained or anchored in some fashion or maybe even connected. Now, I haven't found that specific evidence yet, but I've seen some suppositions being made. Now, these things, just to tell you what they are, they're 12 by 12s is the minimum. They could be 13 or 14 inches around, 12 by 12. And the pieces are 32 feet long. 32 feet of a 12 by 12. That's going to weigh a lot. They're tipped with iron, you can see the iron tips on the end of each of these. And one interesting thing about Erskine is that he was a member of he was a fellow of the Royal Society. What's the Royal Society? Well, those were the scientists, the educated people of the time. Who else was what's called an FRS? You know, in the bottom right of that picture, he signs it FRS. Well, he also wrote to Benjamin Franklin because Benjamin Franklin was a member of the FRS. So they were peers, in a sense. And so Erskine wrote to him and said, you know, what do you think of this plan, Doctor? Well, I haven't found the response yet, but I hope to one day. And this is also called a tetrahedron because of its many sides. Now, what is this? Oh my God. Anybody seen this before? Yes, a few of you have. It's a half-scale model of that tetrahedron, and it's at Ringwood Municipal Building. And you can go there and take a look at it. Now, this is half the size of what Erskine was proposing. Very impressive and very heavy. Now, the other thing, this is an example of a row galley. So you've seen the obstacles now. This is the row galley, and you can see in the ports there, the oars are sticking out, and the special kind of sail that it had. And these were what was part of the defensive system. Okay, now here comes audience participation. This is a 32-pound gun. And I'm going to yell fire, and you are all going to spend the next 15 to 20 seconds yelling boom, 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 boom in all your might. I'm going to ask Tim to occasionally, every 4 or 5 seconds, yell fire, right? And I'm going to ask Bob Carpenter to, before he says fire, you got to say ready, okay? Everybody else is going to go saying boom, 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 okay? You ready? And you have to make sure you are heard over the boom, boom, boomers. Any boomers here? Okay. Are you guys ready? What's your word?
Ready.
Oh, boy. Really good, Bob. Okay. Tim, how about you? What's your word? What?
I said fire.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay. You ready?
Ready?
Okay, go. Done. Thank you. Very good. Everybody participated. We got our oxygen and to keep us awake, and we're all going to be good for the rest of the day. Thank you for participating. But, you know, think about how hard it is to hear them with all the noise and smoke of what was going on here. And so, as I go through this, I really want you to appreciate, yeah, okay. This is the 18-pound guns. There were 2 of these. This is a replica that's up at Fort Lee. I put this sign in because Burdett's Landing. Anybody here from Edgewater? No? Okay. Well, in Edgewater, this sign is in Edgewater, and it was put in the 1950s, and it tells the story of a 2-gun battery that was probably near Burdett's Ferry, and we don't know exactly where, but it is described in some of the British after-action reports that this 2-gun battery was very effective because they were down at the ship's level, and they fired what do I mean by an 18-pound gun? Some of you know, right? That's the size of the shot that it shoots. Now, a 32-pound gun shoots a 32-pound ball. Anybody know how far? 3 miles.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now, from Fort Lee to the other side of the river, not even a mile. So the ships were getting pretty much full force from those 5 32-pound guns and these 18-pound guns. And there were some 24s in there too, as you recall. So there was a lot of heavy artillery shooting at these ships. And I have some journals reports from some of the one of the captains in particular. And I think this particular ship was one of the more important ships in all of the engagements, not only here, but also in Philadelphia and also down south. This ship was captained by a guy named Andrew Snape Hammond. But look at the build date. It's a brand new ship. That's 3 years old, right? Well, 2 years old, actually. So it was probably, some of these are first engagements of this ship. But it was all over the East Coast. Now, let me just take a moment, and I'm going to paraphrase why I had you all shouting. Amidst the fire of 100 cannons from both sides of the river, 100 cannons shooting. Okay, most of the damage, hello Jersey, not the Jersey Shore either, the Fort Lee side, the guns were well served. These guys had gotten, after multiple battles with the Royal Navy, they'd gotten pretty good, right? They're beginning to really get the Brits. And so then he goes on to say they took 2 of the galleys and captured them. By the way, they also captured another sloop, which may have held the secret weapon, which you haven't heard about yet. Now, the last part of this journal, Captain Hammond's journal, tells a story, an hour and a half of getting through continuous fire. Continuous. Now, he was the other side, so he may have been a little, favoring what he had to go through, maybe. But, it was not easy to get through at that time. Now, the next slide, I'm going to reveal, I have to swear you all to secrecy, All right, here comes the secret weapon. What is it? Yeah, our first submarine. All right, now this is I love this story. This guy who drove this thing, any sailors piloted is the right term. He piloted this thing. Now, the text in the bottom told me that this is not exactly an accurate description. Then a guy who was a high school teacher up in Old Sayreville decided about 20 years ago to make a good replica, did extensive research. So there is, in the museum up in Old Saybrook, there is a really good representation of what this thing really looked like. Now, what did it do? Well, in September, early September, the first week, the first attack occurred. They put it in the water at Lower Manhattan at the tip, and he got in it. His name was Sergeant Ezra Lee. He was sort of a volunteer, but I think he was also sort of a, I don't know. They thought he might be good at it, I think, and they asked him to do it. But the elevation is the side, the plan is what it looks like from the top, and then the cutaway shows the operator. Now, there's a few things you have to think about. Now, this thing's underwater, right? If it's going to work. And, okay, so what does he do? Well, he has to use his feet to pump the bilge and lower the boat or raise it, okay? And now he's also got a propeller in the front, right? And he's got to work the steering, the rudder. He's got a rudder in the back, turns it, right, moves it. And he's got to get through the tide. His first attack is of all strange things, the name of the ship that was the command ship of the Royal Navy was the Eagle. I don't know, maybe Benjamin Franklin got the idea that we should have an eagle just because we were taking it away from the Brits, So anyway, here's Ezra Lee, and he's pumping with his feet, he's moving this rudder, and then he's got to he's going to have to put this screw in, but he's also doing this propeller. So he's got a lot going on, and he's underwater. Well, okay, he's also towing a torpedo, they called it, or a mine, and he's going to attach that to the ship, you know. So he gets under the ship, which is kind of between around where Ellis Island is, I believe, maybe a little more in the channel. And it's the command ship. The head of the Royal Navy in New York is there. He's in it. So he gets under there, and he starts trying to put this hole in it to affix the mine. Well, he's getting a little uneasy. It's not going in, whatever. And so he's trying to keep it stable with the water pressure and all this stuff. He's got a lot going on. He's underwater. Now, how is he going to tell how deep he is? He can't see. Well, there were gauges. So the science here is pretty amazing to me. So, and how does he see this? How does he see the gauges under the water? He has a luminescent plant that's surrounding the gauges so he could see in the water. You never, I mean, this is amazing. To me, the science is just crazy. So it's ready for, what do they call it in education? STEM, science, technology, engineering, right, and math, right. But these guys, look at what they were doing. I mean, it just astounds me. And they should keep it a secret, you know. So anyway, the rest of the story quickly is that he didn't realize that one of the pieces of science, I think, and he began to come up by pressure, and he couldn't get the thing in because he was coming up in the water. What was going on? So I asked the marine biologist, I said, what do you think was going on? And she says to me, oh, it's probably the salt wedge. I said, what? The salt wedge? What's that? Well, as the tide comes in, it brings more salt water. And it brings more salt water, has more buoyancy. So the reason we think, my discussion with her, is that we think that he didn't realize that the buoyancy was changing so fast and so strong. And he was trying to get this thing in, and he couldn't because it was trying to move him up. And it did. It pushed him, and they saw him. So then the ship's crew sets an alarm. You know, oh my God, we got something going on. So he can't attach this mine. So he beats a hasty retreat, smart, and then he actually he's tailing this mine behind him. And now the tide has changed because it's come in, because that's what's raising him. So, and that was the plan. I mean, he had to time the way the water moved and the tide moved. So he gets up there, and he's cranking away, and by now the alarm has spread to Governor's Island. So the troops on Governor's Island man the longboats, and they're out there rowing, and because now he's near the surface and he's visible. And so they're going after him, and he's towing this thing. So he says, well, and how does this underwater mine work? It's got a clock in it, Connecticut clockmakers, you know. And so he says, well, I don't want to get caught. Let me give these guys a surprise. So he blows the mine off, probably the first real combat mine explosion, underwater mine explosion, and they get all scared, and they leave him alone because they don't know he's got another one, I guess. And so he makes it back. So now our secret weapon has become not so much a secret anymore, but it's still, they don't know quite how to deal with it yet. So the reason I wanted to give you that background is they tried twice more with this secret weapon. And they took it from the Jeffries Hook area, which is underneath the George Washington Bridge Tower on the New York side. And there's a little peninsula that sticks out. And they had it there, and they went down to 100th Street, approximately, in the area called Bloomingdale. And they tried again. They tried it this time on the Phoenix, the HMS Phoenix. Again, it didn't work because I don't think they really realized how powerful the salt wedge was. So it's a fascinating science story for me, anyway. Now, so that was all later in September, and late September they tried that again. The Brits didn't know what was going on. Now, after Fort Lee and Fort Washington fell, or after Fort Washington fell, not yet Fort Lee, there was an invasion of New Jersey through Lower Closter Landing, I believe is the right term. Bergen County Historical Society has not too many years ago placed a blue and silver marker down there on the river to mark the site of the invasion. The Brits having such a good navy, they also had pretty good invasion sources and could move troops over the water. We saw that after the Battle of Brooklyn and Kips Bay and all those other things in New York City. And how they moved all the troops around to the Battle of Brooklyn and got them on shore, you know? I mean, they really had pretty extensive amphibious infantry technology. This is a marker that's in Tenafly that notes the invasion route that the Brits took. This is the invasion of Bergen County, folks. And it was done by moving the ships, the infantry troops, up to Lower Closter Landing and across from Phillipsey Manor, and then down Hyler's Landing and down County Road and into Englewood, and then up the hill through Leonia. And when they got there, when they got to Fort Lee, I read something recently that said there were 9 members of the rear guard killed, and I've never heard that before, and I'm wondering it might make a decent research effort, because I think it'd be good to commemorate these guys if we can find out who they were. And I have a little story about one of them. One of our killed in action people. His name was Hardy Pierce. He was a captain of artillery. And Hardy Pierce was manning one of those big 32-pound guns in one of the events on the river. And it seems that he was in the excitement and the noise and the smoke and the noise and the booms and everything. He didn't realize that the gun that he was in charge of didn't fire. And he walked in front of it to get a better view through the smoke, and it went off. Ended his life quickly. And I just feel like it's important that I'm a veteran. I know there's probably veterans in the audience today. And I think it's important that we treat those people who defended us back then as veterans who should be recognized and memorialized. So I've been working at the Fort Lee Historic Park to develop perhaps a sign or a story that tells his story about his sacrifice. Now, this is Fort Lee Historic Park today, so I just wanted, if you haven't been there lately, we've done a lot of rehabbing of it, and I feel it's looking pretty good. I hope you all agree. And you know, it's not a big park, it's 33 acres, but in Bergen County, 33 acres is a lot of park. Now, all these things happen there, and you can see there are some new wayside exhibits if you haven't been. The visitor center has been painted after 39 years of never being painted.
And the horse.
And the horse is a new part of the exhibit, thank you. And so I think we're trying to make it more respectable as a site of these events. And I think Monument Park is where the retreat holds its annual commemoration. And if you want to take part, I would appreciate your considering it. It's the weekend before Thanksgiving is usually when it's held. Now, I brought you back to the scene of the British ships, and the Roebuck is the one in the middle of the three larger frigates, 44 guns. The one in the lead is the Phoenix, and the third one is the Tartar, and these were all frigate-sized vessels. The last vessel on the left is a tender, and they would carry supplies. Now, the one thing I haven't mentioned are the fireships. And I think there were 2 fireship engagements in addition to, the row galleys and the obstacles. And they prepared a number of ships with highly flammable materials, more like large rafts. And the Phoenix and the Rose were anchored about 4 miles north of Spuyten Duyvil on the Jersey side because the water was shallower and they were in the lee of the cliffs. Well, our fireship captains and crews took these very large explosive ships, pretty large, maybe not gunboat size, but still sizable, and at night brought them up. That's why I don't have any pictures of it. and tried to grapple them onto the frigates and set them afire. And so the frigates are all anchored and cabled, and they're pretty stationary, and they're not going to move. They have no propulsion. They are in the shallow water, but they're also not, the current's not very much in there either. So our guys, come out of Spuyten Duyvil and go up to where the ships are anchored and grapple onto them. And they grappled to one of the tenders, and it got set afire before they could cut their lines and get away. It caught fire and sank. And I believe it might still be there, but we haven't looked for it yet. But these are the kinds of things that, the bravery of somebody with this explosive boat going out there and setting it on fire and leaving. Well, how are you going to leave? Well, you jump in the water and you swim away. Just some of these things just are pretty amazing to me. And I just wanted to take a moment to read you a little bit about Captain Lieutenant Hardy Pierce, basically his obituary, and also a note for those of you who are going to be celebrating the 2026 Valentine's Day. I'm going to raise the bar a little bit, and I wanted to share with you this story of Captain Hardy Pierce's demise. It says, this is a newspaper article from Providence, where he was from, and this is November the 16th. It says, in discharging a cannon at some of the enemy's ships that were on the 5th of November, endeavoring to pass Fort Lee at New York, it missed fire. When the brave, though very young, by the way, he was 18, very young, the intrepid and gallant Captain Hardy Pierce of Providence, stepping nimbly before it, gave orders on a sudden went off when he received the whole charge in his body. You see what the charge looked like, right? Which put a period to his existence. Not a very nice way to describe his death, but now, to raise the spirits a little bit, I took an opportunity to look at what Henry Knox was saying about this situation. Remember, he was in charge of the artillery, Henry. And so he's writing to his wife, and he's writing November 10th. And he says, "Dear Lucy, this makes the 4th letter which I've written to you within the 6 days past." So he's a pretty prolific guy writing to his wife, right? "Had I time, opportunity, I should not let slip one day of writing the sentiments of my heart, okay, to her whom my soul loves. So sweet the intercourse and correspondence of tenderly connected friends." Isn't that a beautiful statement? He's a soldier. He's also a husband, and he's a father. "Give my and he goes on to say, again he's talking to Lucy, and he says, "Give my compliments to Mrs. Isaacs, and to inform her that Captain Perot is well, stationed at Fort Washington." Now, November 10th. He's not going to be well for too long. Then it goes on to say, "Young Hardy Pierce had his head shot off by an accident when firing at the enemy's ships on 5th November. So he's including this in a letter to his wife, telling her. So he is quite in touch with his troops to report to his wife that this young, brave soldier was killed. He goes on to say, "As soon as Mr. Howe," that's you know who he is, "will permit us to go to winter's quarters, I shall be obliged to go to Philadelphia on some affairs relative to my department, the artillery. Wherever I go or whatever I do, my thoughts are upon my love and my lovely infant. May that drive being who hast and is able to carry us through vast difficulties preserve you both. Adieu, my dearest life. Henry Knox." Now, Henry and Lucy had 13 children. Yeah, 13 children, which, you know that the death rates was probably often pretty high at that time, smallpox and all that stuff. But, here's a guy who very much loves his wife, and I thought it would be a nice way to end for Happy Valentine's, everybody. Okay? Thank you. Questions?
Was the artillery that was engaged here, was that part of the reconfigured artillery that Knox put together?
Don't know.
Yeah.
That's why I brought you a little bit of an insight. I'm trying to figure that out right now. I don't know. I was trying to get an inventory of the guns that were that were collected by the Brits at Fort Washington. I haven't done that yet. But there were other guns when we took over, which were at Fort George, and there were other guns throughout the city, but these were really big guns. I mean, the 32-pound guns were called Garrison guns, and you'll see them in this model, and they were on special carriages like they used on the ships because they were so heavy. Now, the 18-pound gun was on what we call a traveling or a field carriage, and that allowed the troops here at Fort Lee to take those two guns with probably horses and or oxen down to the level the river level in Edgewater. So, and then they could move them back from the where they were probably a target, move them back a little bit. So, and they were reportedly very effective. And I have a book with me.
The guns or the regiment? I mean, were
the guns.
The hit rate, was that,
kind of.
Well, yeah, I mean, the hit rate by that October 9th story of Captain Hammonds of the Roebuck, he was getting beat up pretty good by October 9th. And so the remaining couple, there was October 27th, there was one, another one, and then November 5th, 6th, there was another sort of thing. That you heard about the guy getting out of range and putting out the boats to get, the 29 hours to Dobbs Ferry. And that actually works out to about a half a mile an hour, which he could have walked there faster. So, any questions? Please.
How far was the Pearl from the two forts when they sent out the ships to start rowing?
I don't know exactly, but I think it says they passed where they could be shot at. So they had to be north of the guns. The Fort Washington guns were further north than the Fort Lee guns. But, and they had to be closer to the channel side, so they were closer. But when you're up high, you can't put the barrel of the guns down too well. So otherwise the shot.
And you couldn't shoot at the rowers?
I'm sorry?
Couldn't shoot at the rowers with the cannons?
Well, I think they were beyond the cannons actually. So, and they would have tried to move, more to as far as they could get, but, or closer maybe even, because they would be under the ability of the guns to shoot. I don't know the tactics involved there, but according to what the journal said, they were out of the range, and then they had to row their way against the tide, probably to keep from going back into where they could be shot at. So those guys were working hard, keeping the ship out of trouble. Yeah?
So trying to picture this.
Yes.
I know Spuyten Duyvil has a rowing club on the Harlem River. So where the Harlem River meets the Hudson River.
Yes, sir.
And they're both tidal.
Yes.
The Fort Washington or Cockhill or Tryon would launch off where the Spuyten Duyvil Rowing Club is now, go up the Harlem River into the Hudson, and attack the ships that were very close to where those Hudson River and Harlem River met.
Yeah. Well, actually, Spuyten Duyvil now is not Spuyten Duyvil then, because they changed the course of the river. What's that? It's the Harlem River at that point, right? Is that right?
The Bronx River.
Oh, it's the Bronx.
They changed the Bronx River and stopped it from spinning.
Oh, okay. I think it's the Harlem that. Yeah.
Canal, where the Spuyten Duyvil is today, the ship's canal was built to connect the Hudson River with the
Right.
North River.
Right.
With the East River and the Harlem River.
Right.
But the Harlem River really isn't a river.
Yeah.
It's a strait.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
the tidal forces.
Right.
It's a mess over there.
Right.
So to make it navigable, they cut a ship canal, but that was within the last 100 years.
Yeah.
And there's actually a part of Manhattan.
Yes.
It's
On the other side.
rough
Right.
because they filled in what had been the original
Right.
Spuyten Duyvil. So,
Right.
so it causes all sorts of, depends on, if you get arrested there.
Yeah. Right. Where are you? Right. 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 Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, and that's where they had where they built the raft ships, whatever you want to call them, that were the fire ships, and then they took them about 4 miles up to where the Phoenix and the Rose were anchored, and that's when they lit them up. Yes, you have a question, sir?
So when the British were going to come across the
Hey, Kevin.
Yes.
Question. In the painting of the forcing of the Hudson,
Yes.
you mentioned in the distance, further upstream,
Yes.
vessels.
Yes.
Were they American or
Yes.
British?
Oh, yeah. That side, these guys are headed into the fray. They're trying to go north, obviously. And they were our vessels, and there's 3 of these paintings by this artist, Dominic Serres. And this one, you can see in this area, just to the left, you can see those sails better, but you also see clearly here the chevaux de frise. Now this one doesn't show, oh yes it does. This one does show the flag flying on top at Fort Lee, where the guns are busy firing.
So if this painting is accurate, the chevaux de frise would basically be just immediately north of the Burdett Landing,
Well,
which is south of the bridge.
right, but just before you try to make a statement about it,
Well,
it
I'm
would
just
appear.
going by the
No,
painting.
I'm not, because I've tried the same thing, and you know, I got a boat and I went out there, and the boat had depth and side scanning sonar, because I started looking out for the chevaux de frise that had the spikes like this in the cofferdam and rocks in it. And I said, you know, if they ever took these things out, the rocks would still be there. The wood may not be, and maybe there'd be a little iron, I don't know. And nothing. I found nothing. And the thing, I did find one pile of rocks on the sonar, and it was like a little bit further south of the bridge. And when you look at where this might be and where the mortar battery is placed at Fort Lee, which on that little white map with all the dots on it that I gave you, there's a curve in Main Street as it heads down towards Edgewater. And it's at that point that I believe that it makes sense from the way the batteries are set up, that they would have wanted to have what's called a field of fire, which means that they want the ships not necessarily to get hung up on the obstacles, but they want them to be in a place where they will be expected to be, and you're having the field of fire, your guns are set up to shoot on that particular area, because these guns were hard to adjust. You know, I mean, science being what it was, I mean, they were trying to adjust the height on the gun sometimes with a block of wood. And they got better at it by having a device that turned, where you could crank the cannon up and down in very small increments rather than trying to pound a wood block to adjust the cannon. So, you know, these are the sciences of war, which, you know, unfortunately has brought us some interesting successes in terms of civilian use of some of these things. But, you know, the point being that this had to be set up. You couldn't move these guns that easily. So, you know, that's one of the ways to do it, is set up a field of fire, and they had to travel and aim for that channel. And, you know, if it was northeast winds, you'd be doing this, going all the way, and that would slow you down and give you a better, you know, you had more target possibilities. So that's sort of the artillery side of operations, I guess you call that. You have another question?
No, just by the way, the pension application by Resolver Orianson of Closter
Yes.
states that he and the Bergen County Militia were involved in constructing the fort. So they
good.
were
Thank
using
you for
some
that.
of our local boys
Yeah,
in the
good.
construction.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. They were also involved in 1781, I guess. I don't know whether your ancestor was, but there was about a week-long battle at Fort Lee between the woodcutters who had come across from the city and the militia about trying to stop the woodcutters from gathering wood in 1781. So there was some action there also in Fort Lee. Okay, any others?
I got one last question.
Okay.
Is it true that the British, pardon me,
had to postpone their invasion from a Sunday to a Monday because of the blue laws in Bergen County.
Oh, I hadn't heard that. Well, thank you very much for that.
Did an American dream, and I got past it.
Yeah, right? Okay.
All right, we're going to
Well, thank you all.
one last round of applause for Kevin. Thank you very much. Wonderful. All right, John, the floor is all yours.
Fort Ticonderoga were built to control access to portage or to river areas. And the one up at Lake Champlain was a direct connection. Lake George, Lake Champlain, Hudson River is a direct connection between New York and Canada, obviously a vital route during the 18th century. The Shoe River connected the two, Lake George and Lake Champlain, and Shoe means fall, and the river fell roughly 220 feet between Lake George and Lake Champlain, but it wasn't navigable. It had many rapids and waterfalls in it. Basically, it's only 3.5 miles, but in colonial times, they would have to travel 12 miles to do the portage between the two lakes. And the reason the French set up this fortress was to control the waterways. They wanted to control the route going north and south. And the French and the British would fight over trying to have control of that area during what was called in Europe the 7 Years' War, and what was called the French and Indian War, the last of a series of wars in the Americas, which took place between 1754 and 1763. What's interesting about Fort Ticonderoga is the fact that it's basically the major design of the French master, the Marquis de Vergen. Vergen basically established what we know as the star-shaped fort. What makes it interesting, as far as uniqueness of Fort Ticonderoga, is the fact that Verdun decided that he was going to use the railings. Railing were extended pieces. The usual sort were the four bastions on the ends. It did not have this additional pieces. There were two on the north and west side, and these pieces were used to defend the curtain wall from cannon fire from the enemy. The French feared that if we were looking at it the way we're looking at it now, this is the south facing you. The Champagne would be on that side, which would be easily defended from the east and the south. But they were afraid about the west and the north side, and that's why they built two additional, what they called ravelins, which were basically triangular fortresses separate from the main body of the fort. The fort itself is sort of unique in terms of traditional for the 18th century. You're looking at a fort that is basically 7 feet high, but it's 14 feet thick. And the thickness is, they built it originally out of wood. The outer structure was wood, and then it was filled with soil. And then the outside was lined with stone, and then mortared into position. This was so that no cannon fire could possibly penetrate the curtain wall. The outer rim of the fort itself had a dry moat. And the moat itself was 7 feet deep, but it was 15 feet wide. So you can imagine the difficulty in terms if you were trying to attack this fort, trying to get just to the wall, almost impossible, because on top of that, you have the fact that it's on a rise, so you're going to be trying to climb uphill. On top of that, it's a crossfire because of the uniqueness of the way it's set up. The killing field would be perfect in terms of you couldn't not avoid being hurt by the cannon fire. The abatis were also there. Those what we were talking about before in terms of their wooden spiked obstacle courses that were set up, so it was impregnable. The French thought that they had solved all the problems. The reason I'm going through all this trouble of explaining the defenses because you'll see how ridiculous it all becomes when you look at the overall terrain of the area, and that's why I gave you the map to look at, because you'll be able to understand a little bit of what's going on. I'm going to mention very quickly two engagements during the French and Indian War, and then I'll move on to the American Revolution. Roughly in 1758, General Abercrombie, the British general in Lake George, moved forward to attack Ticonderoga with a force of 15,000 men. The French only had 3,500 to 4,000 men to try and defend it, and decided that the easiest thing to do, rather than wait for the British to show up and then have a siege situation which they couldn't possibly win, which is what they wished to do with this, was you couldn't possibly attack it forward, so you would try and do a siege for weeks on end and gradually pound it down to shape. Instead, they decided to build a wooden barricade using, again, those abatis in the woods, and they basically slaughtered the British. The British lost 2,000 men that day. The French only lost 400. They lost 400 as against the 2,000 that the British lost. The following year, General Jeffrey Amherst replaced Abercrombie, and that year in '59, he came up with an army of 11,000. Well, the French at this point realized that they couldn't do the same tactics and decided that they needed to retreat. So they were going to retreat and try and get back up to Montreal. So that at that point, the British had control of Ticonderoga and would hold on to it for the rest of the war period into the period of the American Revolution. Which brings us to what would come up to May 10th, 1775. Ben McDonald and famous Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys were the ones that came to Ticonderoga to try and capture the fort for the American cause. What's unique, as you can see, it's so difficult to attack this thing, but he attacked it at dawn, and by surprise, the British only had 2 officers and 50 men and were not paying attention, because even 50 men with this type of situation would have been able easily to hold off the 200 men that were with Ben McDonald that day. But at any rate, we succeeded. And for the Americans, it was a tremendous victory. It was one of the first victories of the American Revolution, because we were able to control the waterways. We had a terrific supply, as Kevin was nice enough to point out. You could take a list, come up here and take a look at the list of the things that they were able to acquire, which was great, to great benefit to the Allied cause. What I think was most vital to the thing, which most people don't point out, was the fact that the common cause was a factor was there. The fact that the group that attacked Ticonderoga that day, the colonists, were from Connecticut, Massachusetts, as well as Vermont. So now you had a united effort. And this was the first times that you saw the colonies working together as a united force against the British. And as Kevin pointed out, you have to note that at this point, this is when Knox would take the cannon that were available, and he would bring them over the 300 miles. He did it in 6 weeks over the Berkshire Mountains to bring them to Boston, to make the British basically evacuate Boston because of the firepower that they delivered there. The Americans, when they controlled Ticonderoga, they decided that they were going to make it their impregnable force, that the British wouldn't get it back again. At least so they thought. So if you look at the map, across from Ticonderoga, you'll see there's a number of things, horseshoe batteries, and there's a dock. They built the batteries. They called it Independence, Mount Independence, and they built a bridge going across, a wooden bridge connecting Ticonderoga to the Independence, and they also built a boom chain across the lake with the hope that would also stop any British ships that would be trying to come down the Lake Champlain. I just want to read briefly the description of the fortification that they built there. The bridge was used to connect the two, and the bridge consisted of 22 sunken timber piers with floating timber spans fastened by chain to the piers. The sunken piers were made of tree trunks approximately 20 to 25 feet long and 8 inches in diameter, placed together to form a square, and then filled with stone. And these were then sunk, and they said that they were visible into the late 1800s. People still saw where this chain that you see the chain and boom marked on the map. And unfortunately, the Americans didn't hold on to Ticonderoga very long, though. In July of 1777, to be exact, July 6th of that year, General Bergen began the three-pronged attack that we all are aware of that was later labeled as the Saratoga Campaign. As he came down Lake Champlain, of course, the first thing he was going to have to do was conquer Fort Ticonderoga. But that's no problem as far as he was concerned, because he looked at his other general, General Phillips, and said, looking at the terrain, well, why don't we just mount our cannon on the local high-rise? And there happened to be, in that area, you'll see on the map, it's marked Phillips, there was it wasn't a mountain, it was just a mount area that served as an overlook that actually you could see Ticonderoga from, and it was only 350 to 400 feet high. But the point was that they didn't think, the French had always thought, well, you're not going to be able to drive cannon up that hill to do anything. But the British decided, yeah, we could easily do that. They put their cannon up there, and the Americans were immediately forced to surrender without Burgoyne's army even firing a shot. So after all these fortifications, after all this preparation, it was a total loss. And basically, the British, even after they lost Saratoga, would retreat back to Ticonderoga, hold on to it, for control, but they could do nothing. They had to retreat back to Canada. And I thank you very much for your attention. Anyone that goes up there, by the way, I highly recommend that you go to that Mount, I call it Mount Defiance today, the place where the British set up that cannon. And from there, you not only have a beautiful view of Ticonderoga looking down at it, and you can see how easily it could be bombarded, but if you look to the south, you can also see Lake George stretching out for the south, and you can easily see why it was such a valuable piece of land that they were trying to defend. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, John. This program has been made possible in part through grant funds administered by the Bergen County Division of Cultural and Historic Affairs, Department of Parks, through a general operating support grant from the New Jersey Historical Commission, a division of the Department of State. We look forward to welcoming you here next month. We have a really excellent speaker. We're going to have somebody that embodies so well the character of Peggy Shippen Arnold, Char Weigel. That's March 11th at 7 p.m. We hope to see you here. And I want to shout out an event that's happening this weekend you might want to attend, happening in Bergen County. The Oakland Historical Society will be having a Washington's Birthday Herds Brigade encampment at the historic Van Allen House on Route 202, and that is going to be from 12:30 to 4 p.m. in Oakland this Sunday. Michelle in the back could answer any other questions you might have about it. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Get home safe, and we'll see you all very soon.